First I'd make a simple point that if every person who's infected infects one other person before they die or recover, the epidemic's going to keep growing. That's sort of straightforward. And so that gives you an idea why it's so imperative that people who are infected be taken out of circulation immediately and put into a care facility. And when you think about the number of people who are potentially going to be infected, I mean, that alone is a staggering requirement to meet that. Because if you have somebody who's sick with this in their home, and unless people are totally, barbaric, they're going to try, their family is going to try to help them, relieve their suffering, and they're going to get it. They're going to get sick too, unless they're dressed up for level 4, precautions, and obviously not going to happen at home at this point. So this just give an idea just how deadly this situation actually is and where it's heading. I mean, look at Kinshasa, in Congo. There's more than 10 million people there. I mean, what happens when this thing starts to get around there? Or Lagos, okay. So we're really on the brink of hell. Now I wanted to go through some of this forecasting that LaRouche has done, and I think it's important. There's science to it, and I think that the scientific principles are important because to address this problem, unless we come up with some magic bullet in treatment, we're going to have enormous costs. There's an enormous additional cost for an economy, and it has to be sustained. So that you have to begin to mobilize an economy to function. It's like if you're fighting a war. I mean, you have to have, like World War II, Franklin Roosevelt was able to implement the kind of economic policies he was not able to do before the war. And we got through the war that way. He did a certain amount before, or we wouldn't have been able to win the war. But the point is, you have to have a functioning economy. And LaRouche's and our organization's expertise in this matter is going to be very, very crucial to be able to do that. So when I joined this organization, I was fall of 1974, and one of our first campaigns was get tractors to the Sudan. Sudan had immense has and still has an immense agricultural potential. What's happening? I just looked this up, the other day because I didn't remember all of the details. But we actually did a study of the auto industry and how the auto industry could be converted to make tractors. Okay, and the tractor companies were not producing what they needed to. There were shortages of steel, and there were a lot of problems in implementing such a policy. But and there's also a problem with agriculture, with the fertilizer. The natural gas was not available for the companies who were making fertilizer. We went through all that. That was the very beginning of the Executive Intelligence Review, one of the first issues, I think, of EIR. And so that's why we had to have EIR, because nobody else would attend to these matters, and we actually did that. So that's way more than I was remembering, but it was worth thinking about, because I do remember that mobilization to get the tractors, that their poster of the United States Labor Party was a tractor, and we were known in Europe, they call us the tractor people. So LaRouche says basically both the economy itself and the biosphere require at all times sort of what you could call a surplus of energy that goes into further development, for progress, more advanced species, more advanced modes of production, increase in the human population. And this surplus is not of free energy has to be achieved. I just want to quote Vernadsky, Vladimir Vernadsky, who LaRouche likes Vernadsky for many reasons. But one is that there's a certain proportionality. In other words, the relationship between man and the biosphere, in a way, is like the relationship of the biosphere to the inorganic or non-living. In other words, that it's of a higher power. We actually command and direct the behavior of the biosphere, just as the biosphere actually controls, in a sense, the development of the non-living matter and reorganizes it for purposes of further development of life. And Vernadsky, this is a nice little book by one of his pupils. And Richard Vernadsky said, in a limited, definite region distinctly separated from the rest of the planet, in a special shell of the Earth, formed by the biosphere, which is characterized by irreversible processes, life will increase and not decrease in the course of time the free energy of this shell. And so that was his formulation. It's not easy. It seems simple, but it's not. This man was a great genius to actually make this generalization about how the entire, first of all, conceive there was such a thing as the biosphere acting as a unity, and then that it actually had this unique capability to do that. And so, in the case of an economy, it's the human mind that generates the increase in productive power and allows the free energy. In the case of the biosphere, it's a very interesting question. Where's the mind that does that? Where's that coming from? I don't think we know. I think that actually is not an answered question. That's how I see it. There's more to it than people have been willing to admit. In fact, the great physicist Riemann said, back in the 1850s, he said that the bias, this is in something called the Philosophical Fragments. It's not his best known work, but he said that the biosphere, our translator used the word biosphere. I don't know that he actually used that, I don't think he used that word, but takes the mind of the earth, I think, takes into itself the nature of the existing species and uses that to formulate more advanced species. So he had the idea there's something resembling mind that's at work here. And nowadays we don't think about that. We think we know so much because we know all about the genetic code and all this crap. But we really don't know any better than he did. But it's interesting that he came up with that already 150 years ago. So in the case of the biosphere as well, you have one of the things, manifestations of this increasing free energy is an increasing rate of flow of materials through the biosphere. It's called the migration of atoms, biogenic migration of atoms caused by living processes. And one example of that they give in this book is that if you have a field of grass, everything turns over every year. Everything recycles. If you have forests, maybe 50–60% of the living matter is recycled. The leaves fall off, and they're broken down by fungi in the ground, and they're recycled, and material so it goes back in the soil, or it's carried off by the rain, and it goes into the ocean, and so on. But so this was an example that he gives of this how the progression in time, from forest to grassland, which is relatively late, in the evolution of the plant world. Now, in the biosphere, how a deficiency of free energy manifests itself. And remember, though, the biosphere is very much dependent on what we do, because large part of the Earth's surface is what we plant and how we regulate it. So that's where our food production, animal health, veterinary medicine, maintaining land so you don't have dust bowls. These are some of the things that are required. And then to maintain water for irrigation, fertilizer, control of locusts. Think about the effect of a swarm of locusts. You know, I think they come from Saudi Arabia and they end up in Africa if they're not stopped. You know, what the effect of these things are. These are questions that determine the free energy of the biosphere. Does it function, or does it disrupt it? And so what we saw, okay, as Deborah began about this task force that we established in, was actually in '74, late '74. That's just when I joined the organization. My first national conference was here in New York City. Came down from Buffalo and got to hear a couple of presentations. Some of the pictures from that are in this thing. Eric Lerner gave a talk about this, and he was describing this process of what he said, ecological holocaust. In other words, it's disruption of the economy, but also simultaneously of the biosphere, which we manage, or are supposed to manage. And also, there's an element of psychological holocaust also. When people become, like with the pandemic, people are panicked, you know, they don't function anymore, they can't think. You know, they lose their cognitive powers because they're not organized as a society. So they're these levels of Holocaust. And what we said was that the policy had been laid out by the head of the World Bank, among others, Robert McNamara. He said that a lot of these countries are really fourth world countries, not even third world countries, you know, places, you know, like Zaire, okay? That sort of maps, some of it maps onto Kissinger's, you know, list of countries that had too many people. I think he had a list of about a dozen countries in his NSSM 200. And Ethiopia, I remember, was one of them. And there's some in South America, but a lot of African countries. So McNamara said these are fourth world countries, and we're really not going to do it much. We're not going to do anything to maintain them. The opposite, we're going to steal what we can from these places. Now, what LaRouche said is that if your free energy becomes negative, in other words, you're using up more energy than you're making available to maintain the biosphere, maintain the functioning economy, what will happen? He said, sort of, this is one way he put it, the lower forms of life will tend to take over. Okay, the higher forms of life require a higher level of free energy, and it's not there. So that he said the lower forms will take over, and this is where you begin to get the spread of diseases. You get blights of crops. You know, the crops die of disease, like the potato blight, you know, in Ireland, and the Great Famine. Then you'll have animal diseases, like we had swine flu in large part of Central Africa starting in 1975. And by the way, with animal diseases, think of what it means when people live, because they're so poor, they're living in very close proximity to animals who have diseases. Think about the additional factors, you know, in protecting people's health. I mean, all these things reinforce. It's a multiplicity of these things. And so once you were committed to this issue, you could begin to see all these implications. Once he made a decision that we have to look at this and address it. And then we put together a report, and we had three principal cases, three epidemics. One was influenza, and what we showed is, I believe it began in India. And then of course, it was 1918, you know, the hideous conditions at the end of World War II, people in refugee camps, so all countries were disrupted. And the thing, I think they killed 50 million people or so. More than died in World War I, died from influenza. And my mother had influenza. She had it. That was, you know, she was, you know, I guess, an adolescent at the time. And, but it was a terrible situation in this country. A lot of people died of influenza, but it was definitely related to the wartime conditions. Then you have, of course, the plague of the 1340s, which was associated with this collapse of the banking system run by the Venetians and the Genoese. They basically pulled the plug on the economy of Europe, and economy was actually there had been a depopulation of Europe over the previous 50 or more years since around 1300. This didn't happen. It's a culmination of a process of economic breakdown going on in Western Europe. Now, apparently, this plague started with rats on the ships, I think, coming from the Orient, India or China, and but the rats carried the disease initially, but what happened was that once people got infected, they began to get into the lungs, and then it spread through the air. Okay, so it was a real Holocaust. I mean, and people went crazy because it was like this case of where people are just not taking care of each other. They just want to run away, and it was. This is what actually the prelude to the Renaissance. It was some people who took leadership at that point and were able to actually reorganize the society. And that's a longer story, and I think we've addressed it at different times. Diane may want to say something about that. But, the third one was cholera. Okay, the cholera. We looked at cholera epidemic of the 1800s. It began in India in 1816. And then over a period of time, it spread to Africa and eventually to Europe. And Africa was on the coast of Africa. It didn't get into the interior of Africa. We saw in 1973 there was a new outbreak of cholera in India. And we said that this was going to go throughout Africa, and we thought it might hit other parts of the world, particularly Latin America. And we did see cholera in Peru, I think, around 1990. They had a very bad attack of cholera through the water system, which was very antiquated. But we particularly warned that there'd be famines, and we put together a forecast. Actually, key point is that new diseases would occur, particularly new viral diseases, and it has been known since Louis Pasteur that if you have a virus, or sometimes bacteria, you can pass them to a susceptible host, and a series of hosts, jump one, then next person, it becomes more deadly. You can be more and more virulent. Or there's also cases where, in the right circumstances, you can pass a microbe through a series of hosts which are more resistant, and they become what you call attenuated, and then you can use it for a vaccine. But this idea is that an epidemic is a dynamic process, is a change in the situation as you're going along. You're either getting worse or you're getting better, but So let me show the first picture of the graph we had earlier. Just go down to yeah, that one. All right. So here you are on the left, 75, and you begin.
Launch that so it should be red.
I'm sorry. You want me to point this death rate?
No,
Make it
large.
Make it large.
Get it larger.
There's not that much to read. I think it's just the.
Yeah,
Just the numbers.
I'll just read this. The graph first published in December '74 shows schematically the expected increase in deaths, dotted line, and the catastrophic increase in the death rate, heavy line, as described in a study of the coming Ecological Holocaust by the research team headed by the author. The study projected blight and collapse of basic agricultural production capacity in 1980, 1982, and 1984, leading to a full ecological holocaust in 1987-88, if the policies of the International Monetary Fund were not stopped. In the photograph, victims of drought and famine in Ethiopia in November 1984. Okay.
So the dotted line, to be clear, is what they were saying or what they were projecting would be the death rate, and the black line is what Lyndon
It says
understand.
expected. Now, I don't know who it is that we're expecting that.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. So,
The deaths went down, but the.
so remember, that's nearly a billion people that we're projecting that would die. And mostly, particularly, we had deaths in South America, deaths in Africa, but particularly in Southeast Asia is where we predicted the biggest. Now, this is, as far as I know, that didn't happen. Now, I think that there's some factors here to consider. Remember, Indira Gandhi becomes Prime Minister of India, I think in around 1960, I think 66 or so, and she's there till 1977. She loses the election, comes back in 1980, and she ruled till 83 when she's assassinated. Now, what happens under Indira Gandhi? You have the Green Revolution. You had an extraordinary boost of agriculture in India, partly through new plant varieties. I don't know the whole story, but there was a definite change from what had been going on. So I think that makes a point about leadership, the quality of leadership, which LaRouche has repeatedly stressed about Indira Gandhi. So I think that's considered. The other thing is, I think China is very interesting, because that was obviously one of the places we had in mind. And when we did this, China was in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. It was going straight to hell. And that's 70, and then what happens is 76, Mao Zedong died. 78, Deng Xiaoping became the leader of China. So you had a very big change in policy in China, actually a policy, return to sanity, to modernization. And I know we had an impact. We had a very definite impact there. I know I think Bob Webster has given some talks here about our intervention in China. Remember, it doesn't take a lot. A country like China, there's an elite of people who set policy, and they had been indoctrinated, heavily indoctrinated. Remember, they went through the Cultural Revolution. It was Bertrand Russell had been there, and so on. They had been very badly indoctrinated. But the people who saw that didn't function, and they had a notion of culture from what China's history, and so they got interested in what we had to say. I know Tony Papert, one of our leading members, went to China in 1982. He came back and gave us a report. And he told they were very, very interested in everything we had to say about economic policy. So I don't know the full detail, but there was obviously a shift. So point again is, with leadership, these kinds of things don't have to happen. So we're making forecasts, they're not predictions. They're saying that if policies of a certain type prevail, then we can tell you the consequences. Okay, we can't predict if things like that happen. Changes of leadership. Now I just want to make another point. This is not deja vu. This is not AIDS. Okay, this is very, very different. Don't think, oh well, we got through AIDS, so it looked so terrible. We warned about this and that, and all these horrendous things were going to happen. And see, they didn't happen. Yeah, it didn't happen quite. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I looked at some of the figures. I mean, how many people are actually infected with AIDS? They're saying is AIDS death as let me see. Well, let's see. 2012. I mean, there were people. 32 to 39 million people with AIDS living, and 37 million had already died. So that's a lot. That's an awful lot of people. Now, if you look at the population of Africa, it's grown enormously, a very rapid growth rate. So obviously, it didn't do there what we were afraid it would do. It didn't wipe out most of the population. But now this is a different story. This is a disease which, I said, if one person has it and infects one or more other people, it's gonna explode. And this thing spreads it's not like it spreads at a different rate than AIDS does. I mean, this is, you can't, could be a mistake, to think that this is something, this is just going to be a repetition. It's not like that. So, I guess you can highlights of the of the study. So this is the start of, let's see, I'll just read it. The spread of the pandemic cholera. Cholera swept the globe in the early mid-19th century. Originating in India, cholera spread rapidly to Southeast Asia, Japan, the Mideast, the North and East coast of Africa, Western Europe, and from there to the Americas, is shown in map A. So it's the pre-1816, it's in India, it looks like China, Middle East, and this is more like Mozambique. Pre-18, these two you really can't tell apart. But 1826, it's already in Europe, and it's in the United States. Remember, cholera is a waterborne disease. Okay, it's spread through drinking water primarily. That's how people would get it. And I think that was discovered. A guy named John Snow, I think, is famous for discovering the cholera in water. A British guy. So you see, it never got into the interior of Africa. So, okay, B. Traces the root of the El-Tor cholera pandemic, which originated in Southeast Asia. That's B here. Geographic progress of the two pandemics are noticeably similar. In the 1970s pandemic, however, Africa, and especially the famine-wrecked Sahel, which is northern Africa, is hard hit, unlike the earlier one, where a relatively unexplored African continent was touched only peripherally. So here it's starting out in Southeast Asia. I guess looks like, Malaysia, Indonesia, and then it's going up into parts, looks like China. And here's the Arabian Peninsula. This is the Horn of Africa. Here's Central Africa, and then West Africa. And we have 73 into Europe. I don't think it really did much in Europe, as I recall. Anyway, so that's the cholera. I guess we can do the next one. So this gives us, this I remember very distinctly. I remember Eric Lerner showing this thing. Schema showing process of ecological holocaust, which would advance devastatingly if diseases spread unchecked. Production collapses, primitive accumulation, starvation drive humanity into psychosis. Primitive accumulation refers to looting, basically, economic looting by cutting people's wages, things like this, destroying their consumption. In other words, basically reducing the standard of living and people's consumption. That's what that refers to. So it says increase in primitive accumulation, soil infertility, if you don't maintain the soil, but if you would stop the consumption of the necessity of fertilizer, for instance. Fall in food supply, fall in animal nutrition, fall in human nutrition, increase in disease susceptibility, cognitive collapse psychosis. So I'm talking about people go crazy. Collapse, and it's a circle. Collapse of industry. People can't function if they're crazy. Destruction of capital. In other words, the machinery is not maintained, the capability of production, and then more looting to make up for it. Overwork, lower efficiency. So give us some idea what the dynamics of this thing. That's it.
You want the next article?
I'm sorry.
You want the next one?
Yeah, we grab hold of this thing, yeah.
That's some quotes from people like Richard Lamb and Thomas Ferguson.
I just want the pictures,
Yeah.
the Rawls's pictures, yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, tuberculosis and AIDS concentration in the United States. That's now this is 1985. We're just beginning. The AIDS epidemic, and you see that they tend to go together. They used to say, tuberculosis follows AIDS like a shadow. In fact, I was just reading that TB is the commonest cause of death in people with AIDS. At least, I don't know about the United States, but around the world, generally, And you see this on those coastal regions of the United States, which is interesting.
Why is that coastal?
Why is it coastal, she's asking.
Why is that happening?
Yeah, why
Oh,
is it there?
because a person could be a carrier of
She
tuberculosis.
said, why is it coastal? Why is
No,
it
he
on the
got
coast?
Coastal?
Why is it on the coast?
I don't know, I just pointed out, I think it's an interesting question, I don't know. These are sort of some of them are semi-tropical areas.
Well, it's urban centers,
Oh,
so that's
okay.
what you see. You have big cities on the coast, you have big ports, you have Chicago and Detroit are centers.
Oh, okay, all right, you answered it, okay. Yeah.
And Jessica had a question.
Yeah, I was gonna say about tuberculosis. With HIV, one of the biggest problems was opportunistic diseases.
Right.
So you had, what they call diseases that come in because the immune system is
That's
so
right.
weakened. Tuberculosis is one of the main ones that will take over any system once it's weakened.
Yeah, also, it is opportunistic, but there's another twist to it. That is that in poor countries, a large percentage of the population are carriers of tuberculosis.
Right.
And as long as they're healthy,
They're
it's
okay.
just a little
Spot.
area in the lung, let's say,
Right.
but it's walled off or it's controlled. But when they get the AIDS, then the thing explodes. That's it's an opportunistic infection, that's right.
Breaking out?
I'm sorry?
Art, speak
The
loud.
areas
This is
that
where
are
it's breaking out in Africa, right?
Yeah.
These are the main centers.
But there's more. It's going across the country. That CDC website showed other countries, the papers that I have. I didn't print that out. I just have the,
Do you wanna enlarge that so people
infection
can see
control.
it?
Try
You
it.
can't.
Well, this is fine. Actually, I'll start with this, okay? Because I'm going to discuss now how the virus kills. Okay? Basically, what the virus does is it attacks the cells of the immune system. Like, you know, if you have a blood count, if you ever looked at your blood count, lymphocytes, monocytes, neutrophils, you know, these are the cells, defense cells that are in your blood, which are actually attacked and invaded by this virus, and it's called a filovirus. It's like a filament. That's a group of these things. Ebola virus, virion. That means little virus particle. That's all that means. And so there's several types of cells that it attacks. The mononuclear cells, they're called monocytes, which are important defense cells in your bloodstream. The neutrophils, which are have they have a multi-lobe nucleus, and they're a very important defense cell against all kinds of infections, including bacterial. And then the other is called just macrophages. They devour bacteria, and they produce various mediators, chemical mediators. They're called cytokines. C-Y-T-O-K-I-N-E-S, cytokines. In other words, they mobilize cells. That's what it means. It moves cells. And these are produced by these, the monocytes and the macrophages can produce these cytokines, which then, see this, think of these as first responders, the monocytes and the macrophages, neutrophils. They're the first responders. It's called the innate immune system because you're born with it. The adaptive immune system comes into effect with the help of the innate. They give off these cytokines, and some of them mobilize the formation of cells which are more specialized to combat the particular infection, you know, the kind of virus is specific for it, including antibodies, hopefully, and other cells which will target infected cells, which will destroy cells which are infected with the virus so they don't keep reproducing the virus. And then there's another type of cell they attack. It's called the dendritic cell. I mean, it's dendrite, I think, has little fingers on it. And these dendritic cells are specialized to incorporate or become attached to the virus, and then deliver that to the cells which can respond to it by going to attack it. So they're supposed to, they call antigen presenting cells, the antigen being the virus particle, which they will present to another type of cell, which then activates the adaptive response. And these dendritic cells themselves are attacked by the virus. So it's a very devilish thing, you know. I must say.
I have a question, does that explain why some people would not get a fever, because your own immune system is already under attack, so you wouldn't have the
Well,
response?
I'm not sure. I know one of the things that is often produced in response to the infection by these monocytes is something called tumor necrosis factor, and this generates fever. So I don't know the explanation why some do and some don't. But what they do say is that those relatively few individuals who recover, they begin to produce some kinds of antibodies, and they also begin to show cells which are capable of destroying virus-infected cells. And people who don't recover, they just go on producing more and more of these cytokines, but it's ineffectual. In fact, in some cases, it seems that it helps to bring on your demise. See, one of the cells that's very much involved is called the endothelial cell. It's a little cell that lines the small blood vessels. And the virus infects these cells, okay, and it can help loosen their attachment to the vessel wall. So the vessel becomes very permeable to fluid, and basically you leak. You know, your vascular system leaks into the tissue. You get swellings of parts of your body, and meanwhile your blood pressure collapses because you don't have the fluid in your. And this is where supportive care is very important, because if you can tie the person over, you know, if you can at least maintain the blood volume, you can get oxygen to the tissue, and they may need help breathing. I mean, a whole lot of functions. See, to take care of somebody with this disease, it's like each one is an intensive care unit case. I mean, it's an enormous task to treat this disease, and so you have a lot of people involved in treating it. So hopefully they'll figure out somebody's going to come up with various devices, you know, to remedy some of these problems, and then hopefully they'll have a vaccine. I'll just mention. Why don't you show the next picture? That's very important.
The one with all the cells?
Of the virus, the picture of the virus, and the cells that it interacts with. You know. Yeah.
So over here.
That's it. Okay. So this is uninfected monocyte. This is the virus. It has the little things on it, little stickers. They're called glycoprotein, sugar. It's a sugar entity plus a protein, and they then hook onto the cell that they infect, and they get in. They work their way in. And here they're saying cell death, cytokine storm. That's true in some cases, where the overwhelming overproduction of these cytokines has destructive effect on the body. And then he showed here the endothelial cell, and between the effect of the virus and the effect of the excessive cytokines, you get detachment of the endothelial cell, and it dies. So this is anyway. This is an important part of the disease. The cytokine storm is something that it was in the news a few years ago. Actually, this happened in Britain. They developed an antibody to some component of the membrane, outer layer of immune system cells, and it was supposed to be designed to, I guess, control certain diseases. But what it did was it set off, and then these young guys, you know, who had no money, and so they were being paid to undergo this program, and it set off a disastrous cytokine storm. These guys nearly died. A whole bunch of people nearly died, and supposedly it was a big shock that this could happen, but they completely miscalculated the effect of these things, and that's why you really have to experiments have to be very precise. What you do on a monkey may not apply to a human being, and in fact that was the case in that particular, was that one of the problems. They thought that because it worked on a cynomolgus monkey that they could then, it would be all right with these young people, and it didn't turn out to be true at all. So in terms of a vaccine, what I'm just getting sort of into the literature, but one thing I did read is they have, one candidate for vaccine is directed against the glycoprotein, against those little knot stickers, okay? In other words, you can, if they can figure out how to attach that, the glycoprotein, without the rest of the virus, to a harmless virus, and then inject that into I guess they can use that combined with with a harmless virus together. You can use that to create immunization against the glycoprotein without having the disease. So this is one of the things being worked on.
How do these different antibodies and macrophages and all that know where to go? Attach themselves to
How do they know this enemy?
What they do.
I mean, how do they do that? I mean, how do they know there's some foreign body coming into your
They have
body?
special communications.
Huh?
They have special communications.
I guess they do. How, is there any,
You know,
I don't know much about it.
figure
It's
it
some
out.
kind of it's got to be a recognition system on the surface. It's something on the surface of the cell. That's all I can
It's
say.
called glycoscience.
Huh?
It's called glycoscience, and they discovered it in 1992. Glycoscience.
Okay.
It's brand new.
But there are, they have, it is a rather complicated recognition system that you have, so you know what's foreign and what's you.
Enlarge that.
huh?
Enlarge it.
Well, I have limitations with this.
Yeah, you can only, you can read the thing.
Well, the thing of it is, like, even if you take a simple thing like hay fever, if the pollen gets into you, you start sneezing and carrying on, that's your body reacting to some type of foreign object.
Sorry, go ahead.
Your body is going to react to any type of foreign object. I just used an example of hay fever. Because you got this pollen that a lot of people are allergic to, so you have an antibody-antigen reaction. So hence, the body defense of sneezing because it wants to get it out.
But also, it depends on the route. See,
Yes.
if it can give you by injection, of extracts of this pollen, you
Yeah.
can build up
An immune response.
you can build up a kind of antibody, a different type of antibody,
Yeah.
which will neutralize it. So it can be done.
Mhm.
Can you think of a virus as a general war within the bloodstream of the body between the germs and the defense cells or the white blood cells? And you develop a fever, your temperature rises, that's due to the heat of battle between the germs and the white blood cells.
Yeah, okay.
And eventually, the white blood cells win the war and the fever goes down. But if the germs win, God forbid, the body dies. Like many people died from the swine flu at home and in hospitals. So that means that the germs won the war in their bodies. But usually the person gets better,
Well, it depends. See, if you have this overreaction, like I said, the cytokine storm, the body keeps pouring out these mediators, defense, but what they actually end up injuring is they injure the cells lining the vessels, and that can happen in your kidneys, for instance. So your kidneys can shut down, or your liver, that sometimes happens. So
But literally, it's a war in the body
Yeah, it's a
between
war.
the germs and the white blood cells. But they don't fight each other like soldiers in a war, shooting guns. The way they fight is the way you described, that a germ attaches itself to a cell, and the cell eats it or destroys it. And the germ does the same thing to a cell,
Well, I
to
think
a white blood cell.
what you're saying
That's the
happens
way
is
they fight
these
with them.
endothelial cells they get hit by all this stuff and they fall off the inside.
A combination of the virus and or the
Right.
cytokine
So
itself.
then
The
the
cytokine
walls of
reaction.
your veins
Uh-huh.
become permeable, I mean, so the blood can seep out, they're saying this
Yeah.
internal bleeding, and I
Yeah.
think that would also cause organ failure and all
That's
kinds
right.
of things.
It's like a chain reaction effect.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You've got the invasion by this very toxic virus, and then the body defenses because of what they're pouring out with their reaction. Also, in joint with the toxicity from the virus, it's like a double onslaught that's happening within you.
Yeah.
Normally your NK cells or natural killer cells can do the job, and they can't. And the natural killer cell is like a rifle, shooting a rifle, and what you need is you need a machine gun. So what the body does is it sets up a factory and creates all these antibiotics, and these antibiotics are shot out like as with a machine gun. This is what saves your life. So you're going from rifle fire to machine gun fire, very simplistically.
Uh-huh.
Macrophage is also known as a neutrophil. Neutrophil in the blood, it has the ability to go through the blood vessel wall. Once it crosses into the body, it's known as the macrophage, which means big eater. The macrophage literally touches every cell in your body and asks two questions. First question is, are you part of me? And the second question is, how are you doing? And the cell can say, well, I have a cancer, I need to be destroyed. In the macrophage, the body has 14 different ways of killing a cancer cell. So, it's a macrophage.
It's a lot.
Well, one question is, what is the time between showing symptoms and when someone dies? It seems like this goes pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's
That's
like
pretty-
2 to 21 days.
Yeah, well, look at Duncan. I mean, how he came to the hospital. I think he'd been sick for a couple of days.
Right.
And he came back, and 3 days later, and he was dead in another day or so.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was very quick.
And I think that's a major difference between this and AIDS,
Yeah.
for example, is
Mhm.
how, and obviously how infectious it is,
Mhm.
because the nurses were doing what they knew to do, having not been instructed.
Show those pictures that I brought in, the inadequate so-called protocol in
The
protection.
CDC.
Which is a basic, that's
Yeah.
a lie.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
That is a major lie
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah, I mean, here they show people getting suited up, you know, for patient care, and you see the parts of the neck are exposed.
The neck, the hair, they're not wearing a hairnet.
Yeah.
They should be, you should technically be, when you see the news, you see those people in Africa, they are in a makeshift spacesuit.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Here in America, they're only showing you the gloves, the paper gown, and a mask. All of this is exposed, the face, the neck.
And then you know what, another thing I was thinking, even when you have one of those spacesuits on, the sort that you would hope you'd have on if you were taking care of a patient. Aha, but on the surface of those suits are maybe saliva, you know, all sorts
Yeah.
of things. So those suits, before you take off your gloves or anything, someone else almost needs
Someone
to
has to
wash you
help you.
down.
Has to.
Actually wash the suits down with chlorinated water or whatever it would
Exactly.
be.
Uh-huh.
And because it's too tough.
When I pulled that down, they asked for a response to that, and I wrote them back and said,
This is not.
you have to have someone help you put that on, take it off, and even before it comes off, you've got to go to like a decompression area where you're going through the chlorinated solution, where you have to be washed down
Yes.
with that suit on, then it comes off. The,
Mhm.
the last thing that comes off really are the gloves.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right, and
Uh-huh.
here they instruct you to take the gloves off at the beginning.
They're crazy.
That's really
Can I
insane.
just say, that's
Yeah.
standard procedure.
Yeah.
If you work in the pharmaceutical industry, if you work in the nuclear industry, I mean, there are millions of workers here in the US that have been trained basically to do what they're doing in the most extreme conditions
Right.
of infection, you know?
Right.
and there's there's a couple things to say about that. The amount of people that you need to actually carry out that is multiples of what you would normally think of going in an emergency room. And the other thing is the stress levels involved in people who have to work
with the, yeah.
inside a suit like that.
Right, well,
Plus the
that's-
time involved.
Yeah, what the Doctors Without Borders said is that you have to have a supervisor when you disrobe.
Yes.
Because these things are not permeable and you get hot. You sweat, especially if you're working in a tropical climate, you get hot and you're tired. You might be in the suit for 12 hours. You might be going
Can't
from
do it.
emergency to emergency.
You can't work in a super.
Or however many hours, but
You
you're
get very short
tired, so
amount of
they
time.
say you have to have a person watching you while you disrobe
That's
who
right.
prevents you from making
Mistakes.
mistakes.
Right.
That's
So
right.
that's
the way
the
you do it
crucial
in the nuclear
period.
industry, from like a heavy radiation area to a mild radiation area to a no radiation area to your leaving work and going out to the environment.
Yes.
Every step along the way
It's supervised.
is supervised under both a buddy system, you have to work with somebody else, and also a person monitoring you when you're getting ready to go from that area to a lesser area. They have to be able
Right.
When you
to
go
make
from
sure
dirty
you're
to
following
clean.
a real protocol.
Ron, Burrell, you want to say something?
This
Yeah,
sheet isn't the latest.
It's the same thing,
It's-
when you're
it's
dealing with
different from what they say.
Like,
Ron,
one at a
not
time,
yet.
please.
Go ahead, Ron.
it's the same thing as when you, go through OSHA training, removing asbestos. You gotta, every part you have to be closed off. You suit it up to head to toe, and your feet and your shoes and everything's covered. And then, when you finish removing asbestos, you go into a little area, and somebody pulls you off.
Right.
Yeah,
It
Yeah.
pulls you off, and all the particles will come off. And then after the particles come off, then you go to another space, and they dry you off with some air. And then you can unsue.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to say a couple things here because I don't want us to get too off topic on just the, I mean, look, the point is, one, you can see from this that it's intelligible. And I don't know what you thought of that, the report we got from Lamari, from this doctor who had been on the ground, who was running a treatment center where they succeeded in lowering the mortality to 60%. So still more than half of the people died, but it wasn't 90%. In other words, there were certain things we could do right away. LaRouche's approach, and from what Ernie said about that if every person who is infected who either lives or dies, nonetheless infects just one other person, that you have an out of control exponential increase of the number of people infected. And Osterholm made the point, since it's now in 23 countries, as I said at the beginning, we have however many people who've been infected or died here and 1,000 people under observation. The idea of containment is gone. And I think many Americans still tend to think that there's some way, like the stupid travel ban, there's some way we're gonna stop it from coming here. No, you have to go to plan B, or the only plan which makes, you have to figure out how to reduce the death rate. And to reduce the death rate, you have to go to Africa. You have to go to the hardest hit, that's right, areas, and solve it. Because if you don't do that, you will have no protection anywhere. And that's the thing where you run into these knuckleheaded response of, oh, well, I think they should just let everyone die who has, I mean, just put a wall around them. That's what Edgar Allan Poe wrote. Just let those, no, we're already beyond that. Debbie Freeman made the point. These nations were begging for help in March. March, when this broke into urban areas. Perhaps had the world responded at that time, it may not have gotten to this point. now that we're at this point, she said, what was it, the CDC or the World Health Organization saying 21 countries could have epidemic levels of this?
Well, you
Which
know, when you
means
start
what?
talking about the number of countries, we're beyond epidemic, we're starting to approach pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that word itself is scary.
yeah, exactly.
But then-
And then what he showed and what Ernie said, the psychological effect. I was very struck with people here who have read Thucydides, if you've read the Peloponnesian Wars, and there's a part where the plague comes into Greece. Now you know the population is already very degraded, because why are they having a stupid perpetual wars? And if you read the book, it would be funny if it weren't so tragic, because it has all these dialogues of how they go in and they make this argument for why they're gonna have a war. And you have this, and then they end up in the war. So you know you already are dealing with a low cultural level. So what happens when people get the plague? They say, since it's hopeless, since I'm gonna die anyway, I'm gonna rape my 2-year-old niece. I'm gonna go steal all the money from my grandmother and go out and have a good time because I know I'm gonna die. And what happened was the plague unleashed the most spectacular insanity, degraded, bestial behavior of the whole population. And I really think we have to think about that. Why is the Schiller Institute, why is LaRouche's wife saying we have to do these conferences of a new paradigm? Why is it so significant that the president of China tells the artists, don't be prostitutes?
Yeah.
Your art has to have a moral quality, and it also has to be original. It actually has to be creative. Because what would it take to address this? Suppose we said, okay, we're throwing Obama out of there. He's obviously determined to kill people. His lies are gonna kill millions and billions of people. So we're gonna throw him out. We're gonna get rid of Boner, as LaRouche calls him, get rid of Pelosi. We're gonna have a crash program to address this. So in the US, one, we should find out what these nurses are all saying, like what don't they have in their hospitals? What do we need? Can we produce it here? What would it take to produce it here? How can you build enough respirator masks? What does that take? How can we gear up people to do that? Okay, what do they need in Africa? How much clean water do they need? How many beds do we have on these hospital ships? How quickly can they be moved in there? And you start putting together a real war mobilization. And the thing that strikes me, and also, and you may want to add on, is what would that force us to do with our economy? What would that force us to do with the population? What about all these veterans that we have who actually know something about discipline, who might be able to quickly be trained and train other people? Are there ways that we could, and you would find that by being forced to address this, you would be forced to turn a corner in the way that people think, and in fact, it's the only way that we're gonna solve this.
We could actually use this to create world peace. Because the very people that we're fighting with, though, or wish we were, when you
Right.
look at what we're doing and what we've done since Libya's invasion and the Syrian thing, are the people that have the equipment, as you said, to be able to do
Right.
this. What frightens me, and I'm not a nurse or anything, is to take our army or corps, our soldiers, who have no protective gear, whatever, and put them over there, boots on the ground, building things in Africa. How do we protect them from getting this? You know, what the idea of using the buildings that are already there, bringing in the equipment, bringing in gear to protect the people, and using the people who are healthy in Africa. They're brilliant. I taught African kids; they're extraordinary, and using it this way. The whole idea suddenly, oh, we're going to just take our armed forces and send them over there, scares me, right? From that point. And the other point of view is our own individual lives here. I would watch kids come into school. We talked about it in science, you know, with their shoes on, because I go to Japan. I know they take the shoes off outside and leave them on a shelf, as you know, and they come on in and put on slippers that are provided. Our children, for instance, just sit on the floor, hands in the dirt, you know. The dogs come up to the door with the parents, and so forth and so on. The private school around the corner from me, collegiate school, oh no, man. 7 o'clock, they're out there with scalding hot water and Clorox, and they are literally the whole block, almost all the way up to Broadway, cleaning it before the young men and the little teeny weenies come to the school. Every single morning, when the school's in session, they got the guy there early. So we have a lot of things to think about in our own life, but how do we provide any kind of real sanitation before we suddenly have a couple of hundred people in New York City who have this, you see?
Which will quickly be thousands. Do you want to say anything about that, Ernie? And then he has a question and then Al. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Gordon. What work, if any, is being done on a vaccine? Is a vaccine underway to stop Ebola?
I don't know much about it. I just mentioned this one article I read where they're trying to work out a vaccine to the to this little glycoprotein coat around the virus. And the guy who wrote the article, he's apparently worked with for the military. He's now in Texas in the university. He said that this vaccine that he's developed protects monkeys, but they haven't been able to try it on people. And he said that, I think he wrote this several years ago, and he said that the cost, that it's a question of cost, because he said that it's not profitable for the drug company, because, it's funny he said that, because he said it's a rare disease.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a rare disease, you know.
Well, now I see the
Therefore,
importance.
it's not worthwhile.
Yeah, right.
It's not worthwhile
You know,
producing a vaccine
what
because it's so
Osterholm
rare.
said, Osterholm said we should order 500,000 doses.
Yeah.
So you can see why he also would say that. We haven't even developed it yet, but let's make the order for 500,000 doses now to get them to
Yeah.
be able to do it. Now, Alvin had a question, I think.
Around Katrina, the organization came out with a video and some written material on, and there may be other examples of this, but I remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt's response to a similar tragedy and how it was immediate and massive, again, like a wartime mobilization. And if we could dig that up, if we could find that type of stuff, I think this would be useful to juxtapose and counter to people what Obama is not doing, again, to what a real leader would do. Yes, it's an epidemic as opposed to that, but if you're in New York City, we're still suffering and have not recovered from Sandy. So this might help a person, you know, really even see, because yes, how obvious? I think people wish, a lot of people don't believe, but they want to pretend to believe what Obama's saying and those lies. And I think just facts aren't going to do it, or even the science behind it. But as Ernie and we all know, there's a question of leadership.
Right.
And we should bring FDR up again, and that living image to show again. Because I don't remember the particulars, but it was massive and it was immediate.
Yeah, it was the stormtroopers thing.
It was the hurricane in 1938.
Yeah, it was
38.
the 39,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
hurricane.
there may be other things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Just one thing on what you said that I want to bring up that LaRouche said to the policy committee. He said, we should have a list of the requirements, and Obama should be confronted. Are you going to do this? Are you going to do X? Are you going to do Y? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do it? If you're not doing this, get out. But so that you have, okay, here's what must be done. And we have a piece of it, because I think the nurses, I mean, think of this, 11,500 nurses on a conference call. And some of them tried to blame the administrators of the hospitals. And the leadership of the call said, no, it's a political problem.
Yes.
We're going to the top. We are laying this at the feet of the President of the United States. And they are sending a letter to Obama, but they have compiled, at least for that end of it, what is needed for these hospitals, et cetera, for basic supplies and so on. But you would have to do the same thing from people who have been in the situation on the ground in Africa. What is needed to address this? How many, I mean, LaRouche kept saying, we need to know, what is the death rate? How many people are dying? We have to be able to measure, are we reducing the death rate? Because he said only if you can demonstrate that you're reducing the death rate can you quell the panic and also the disease. I mean, if you can't slow the death rate, then you're not curing the disease. Do you want to answer
Well,
yet? Oh, Fran, go ahead.
The thing of it is, this that I passed around, and I want you guys to keep this.
Thank you.
This is part of the CDC, and there's other things on that. If you pull that page up, I'll try to actually send you all the website, because it shows you it goes down through what talks about the guidelines, how it's skipping from one country to the next, and it shows you the amount of days that it's taking. You know,
Wow.
it's the time is decreasing, but the death rate is increasing exponentially.
Wow.
You know, it was like every 30 days you had X number of deaths. Then it went down to 2 weeks, it was 2 times the rate from when it was 30 days. So we're in an emergent situation.
Yeah. Yes. Wait a
Unfortunately,
second.
actually,
Oh,
to-
wait.
just
What
to-
is your name?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Answer. Go ahead. He said go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Hemmer. I have a really quick question. This is out to the room, actually. If I'm not mistaken, I believe there was a dog that had been contaminated with Ebola in
Yeah.
Spain, and they found the dog.
Yep.
Now, is there anything being done as far as what would happen? Would it mutate differently? Would it be a harder strain to combat if it was from animal to human to animal? Is it something that is only predatory to only animals? Is that a different strain of Ebola? Is there something? Are they even factoring that in that statistically?
Well, okay, it's very important because there were some false leads that this whole story of this Ebola is, the origin of this thing is very suspicious in terms of germ warfare, okay?
Yeah.
Back in the 60s, the first episodes were involved, I think, facilities which were dealing with monkeys in laboratories. And it sounded like these monkeys came from a center, bio-warfare involved company, Lytton Industries, Lytton, what they're called, that were doing experiments, biological warfare experiments in Africa. And they probably infected these monkeys accidentally with this virus they were playing with. But anyway, but monkeys do not seem to be a natural reservoir for the virus. So the CDC tried to claim that monkeys were a reservoir, and it didn't turn out. The latest I read is that fruit bats are carriers. So that's more recent, because I read my medical textbook, Harrison Textbook of Medicine, is about 6 years old, and they say there's no known natural reservoir. So this is apparently more recent, that there's the fruit bats. Now, what role they play in actually people getting infected, I don't know. That doesn't exclude other animals. They may be, once you have an epidemic, the animals could pick it up also from the people. So it's not so, it's more, I think it's more, more complicated.
I hate to say it because I hate reporting on things that I read. There's so much disinformation, but on this thing that they sent out actually from the White House, they said that dogs could transmit it.
Okay.
That animals might not exhibit the symptoms, but they could carry it and transmit it. So, but who knows? I mean, I think that's, we don't know. Actually,
Okay,
we have to get out
I'm
here
sorry,
in a
I have to
second.
interrupt. I know people are panicking, but there is hope. Dr. Brantley was the first American transported from Africa back to the United States with the disease. His blood type is AB+. Now, I don't know why what happened this way, but one of his survivors in Africa sent over a vial of their blood, a survivor from Africa, sent over a vial of blood and gave it to Dr. Brantley. It had antibodies in it, and Dr. Brantley, his life was saved. Now, the media will tell you they don't know if it was due to the vial of blood, if they mention it at all. They won't say if it was due to the blood, antibodies in the blood, or if it was one of these experimental vaccines that they tried out on him. They say he was given both, ZMapp and the antibodies in the blood. However, back in Zaire in 1996, the African doctors gave survivors' blood to 10 Ebola victims. 9 of them survived. So this information has been suppressed since 1996. The CDC doctors were there. CDC, American doctors were there. And they said that the virus had burned itself out. They refused to use this, to investigate this possibility of antibodies being cure for Ebola. Okay, this is 2014. They are not bringing up this information in the media. They're hiding it again. Nobody is mentioning it except for one broadcast on NBC, that Dr. Brantley got this blood. Now, every here and there, you hear about Dr. Brantley's blood being passed on to other people, but it's barely being mentioned. So this is the hope that we have to create a vaccine. Now, they might not be that many survivors, but there must be a way to use small amounts of blood to make it into a bigger vaccine for more people. So the only reason to panic is that the CDC is lying to us. Obama is lying to us. He just appointed some Ebola czar who doesn't even have health education, medicine background, or anything of that nature. They are going out for genocide. We have to recognize this immediately. They are out to kill as many of us as possible. Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth, all those people, the Illuminati. This is not a mistake. This is not stupidity. This is deliberate. We have enough science to create a vaccine from these antibodies in the survivor's blood. So the only reason to panic is that just keep an eye on them because they may come up with a fake vaccine that will actually poison us. And they're lying about how to protect ourselves. But what you have to do mainly is keep yourself hydrated with plenty of water, electrolytes, not Gatorade. Try coconut water. And there's other herbs that can help you remain healthy if it does come to our country, because who knows how long they're going to hold out the possibility of antibody vaccine.
All right, I'm gonna stop here, because there's a few things we have to do.
I have to piggyback on just what you said just for one moment.
Okay,
Because
30 seconds.
she spoke about, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but she spoke about the possibility of vaccines being used against us. I'd like to present this documentary. I've got numerous copies here if you'd like a copy. This is called Lethal Injection. It is about how vaccines can be turned against us. So, if you'd like a copy.
All right, so people can see that. Look, let me just say, the point that Giselle made, and the reason why the leaflet starts with the quotes from Bertrand Russell and Prince Philip, is that this is who LaRouche and this association have been fighting since the 70s, and really what LaRouche identified, remember he talks about when he was in India. Can you talk at the end? Anyway, and his experience in India, where he was in Calcutta the day after the massacre, when the Brits came in and opened fire on that demonstration and just shot down row upon row upon row of people who were demonstrating, and he said the blood was still wet in the street the day after. And he made a decision at that point that his life was going to be, that when FDR died, FDR had a different intent for the world, we know from his son's book. He had a huge fight with Winston Churchill. He said, we're not in this war, so you can keep your colonies. You give up your colonies, and FDR's intent of the World Bank, the United Nations, was that these were to be instruments of the end of the British Empire. They were to be instruments of a concert of nations, which is what LaRouche and his wife have been fighting for decades. And the point is that we have to approach this, what Ernie went through on the question of Vernadsky, that it's important for people to hear to approach this from the top. Because if Prince Philip and Al Gore and Obama science advisor Eric Holdren are determined that they want to wipe out 6 billion of us, there's a number of things going on. Why did they put the Nazis in power in Ukraine? Because they wanted to provoke Russia. Why did they back up the Chechen terrorists? Why are they supporting Al Qaeda? Because they want a war against Russia and China. What LaRouche went through in 1999, 15 years ago, in his video Storm Over Asia, which is unbelievably accurate today. And so what we have to do is we have to organize the American people to think. and to think about what is the identity of our republic, why there had to be a revolution against the British Empire, why the British Empire is still our enemy, and what is the imperial method of thinking versus what is actually creative thinking. And the idea, which is LaRouche's real breakthrough in science, is that creativity can be taught, that genius doesn't happen because you have an extra bump on the side of your neck and you were genetically produced to be a genius, but that every human being, by nature of the fact that we're human, has an innate potential to become a genius. And that's what we have to defend, and it's the only thing to defend, and we have to evoke that in our fellow Americans to remember, because as soon as you get in to the idea, well, if I just stay in my house and wash my hands a lot, and I'm not saying be crazy, like don't go up and scoop things out of the sewer or something, but there is no personal survival. We will not survive a dark age, and even if you could, do you really want to be hidden out in your basement by yourself with a can of beans and a shotgun and end your days like that?
But you know, the American people in their thinking, and I don't know how they miss this point.
Yeah.
They have to, of course the press is so controlled, but we don't get the,
right.
You know. But when you hear that a year ago 8,000 Haitians had died of cholera, which you've been bringing up, when we know what cholera is, when here we have this president who refused to remove those people from the sewer of Port-au-Prince, when our Army Corps of Engineers said it would take 25 to 50 years to bring you any kind of, you know, a semblance of sanitation, clean water, what have you, bathrooms, toilets. And then when you know behind it, there was a huge oil discovery right there near Cuba and Haiti, and they have built up an island full of these high rises and hoo-has. We see, I hate to say this, but we have a president who was listening to people who basically commit murder, and he himself associates with that. He did not. Clinton had a heart attack, and he came back here, and I swear, you know, it has something to do with that. So it's very difficult. My friend, I said to her, she's a nurse at Lenox Hill, her aunt is the president of Liberia. I said, we've been way too slow in this, we got a president, whatever. She said, well, you can't hold the president to blame for everything. And I put her on the telephone call. I called her back. I said, please go on this phone call, because suddenly I'm standing there looking the way I look, and I'm saying, okay, Maggie, take a deep breath, back up a little bit, think what you can do. After that phone call, this is what I can do. And I know the fear on her face, because she's in there and she's taking care of people. You can see it. In fact, I could just see the bent over shoulders from just years of taking care of people. Good person. But anyway, I just wanted to say that it's very difficult to get through these mindsets.
Well, that's why you need leadership. And what LaRouche said this morning, we were listening to him, I have to get to the events, but he said, look, if there's a fire in an auditorium, you have to go by the rules. That is, someone takes leadership and you say, this way to the exit, walk, don't run, and you have a very strict protocol, and if you obey it, you get the maximum number of people out safely. And when you're in that situation, he said, we don't have time for democracy. You don't have a right to your opinion. If there's a fire in the auditorium and you want to sit in the middle of it masturbating or something, you're a problem. It's not allowed. And similarly, in this kind of crisis, there has to be leadership taken, which says, this is protocol. You may not appreciate it, we're saving your life right now. And we're gonna take these measures. And now just let me say, because we have to go, but there's two things, and we should make sure we're in touch, because we're gonna be distributing all week. So as you go, please let Fred know what days you are available, if you can join us at any of these hospitals or medical centers where we're gonna be getting out this leaflet.